GamerType Originals.
It's time for something brief. Red Faction Guerrilla is one of the most fun games I've ever played. My memories of sledgehammer rampages came flowing back to me after erasing pillars in last week's episode for No Man's Sky. I hadn't played the earlier Red Faction entries, so it was a surprise when, way back in 2009, I fell in love with this game. Instead of erasing terrain and digging tunnels like its predecessors, you knock down structures in a Martian society being oppressed by bald overlords from Earth. As a jacketed near-bald figure from Earth who isn't an overlord, you're the front man for a new Martian revolution, and you need to smash things by any means necessary. You'll even get to ride along with nativist rednecks who have no issues spouting terrorphobic sermons. Many of your missions are playgrounds of valid approaches, whether you're breaking through buildings to rescue hostages with your sledgehammer, feeling out weak points in complex EDF structures and blowing them up, or simply driving through a fortification with a big truck. You even have an extremely limited ability to practice stealth maneuvers. Within the EDF's smoldering remains, you'll find the shimmering scrap that serves as the currency you need to build out your cache of weaponry. Tech-wise, the game feels like an inflection point. Havoc-based physics had been around for many years by the release of Guerrilla, but Volition's brain trust used it to build out dynamic destruction in a way we hadn't seen before. While the game challenges you to destroy structures in a creative, non-sledgehammer-based way, they could have just made a sledgehammer game and called it a day. Of course, being more intimate with your malice means you're often tripping over rubble, or, allowing buildings to collapse on top of you. There are limitations to the game's powers though. It's hilarious to see a building with most of its supports chopped out still floating in the air as the game maths out its destruction to the sound of creaking fatigue. There's also a sparsity to the settlements that builds character in this Wild West version of Mars to keep the game from dying from calculations, but it feels slightly fake. A lot of these buildings are empty, unfurnished shells spread across the countryside, and you'll spend a lot of time driving between them. As you roll back the EDF advance, colonists will join you in the fight. Arriving in each district, there won't be much support, but you'll find plenty of help simply pops up once the hammer gets swinging. I've complained about the lack of penalties and harming innocent bystanders in other games, but Guerrilla hammers the point home that these people are your support mechanism. If you get sloppy, you demoralize them. At first, I thought the tight layout of the game's introductory area felt like a technical limitation. All of your earliest missions are always a turn or two away from your safe house. But with each subsequent zone, the game places you further and further from your objectives until you're having to traverse a desert to get anything done. Lesson learned, Volition, but did we really need to make the miles-long trek into town from our secluded base every single time we died, which was definitely more often than I would have liked? Volition's games, the Saints Row titles included, are fun, first and foremost, but they all seem to lack a few layers of polish. In particular, Guerrilla's Mars is very boring to look at. Even the game's fancy pants high-end residential area doesn't feel much different after blowing through the muted reds, browns, and grays of the rest of the world. The snow-capped and punishing finale is over well before you can think much about it. When you're not blowing stuff up, the game's admittedly a little bit less fun. I mentioned you'll be driving a lot and the model never feels quite right. Vehicle response always feels a split second behind the controller input. For all of your destructive powers, you'll still need some standard weaponry to mow down EDF troopers, who appear a bit too frequently and far too quickly for my taste. Lacking an auto-aim in the Xbox 360 version or the PC version with a controller makes shooting a weird affair too. 7 years after I've beaten it, Guerrilla is still an enjoyable romp. What blows my mind is that after all this time, with all of the extra horsepower we have now to calculate insane physics, the closest thing to the dynamic freeform destruction Guerrilla achieved lies in the of Just Cause 3 and the urban corridors of the next Crackdown game, which is still another year away. As for when the Red Faction will rise again, well, only Nordic Games knows at this point.